when I started moose hunting, I had one bag of flour left. And I can remember getting down to the very end. I remember the last bread I cooked when and I had some cornmeal. And the last one I made cornmeal, a mix of the cornmeal and the flour. I made this cornbread, and I had my cornbread. And the last batch I made, when I ran out there was this little, I think I had maybe like 2 or 3 pounds of flour left. But I went and I miscalculated the salt, and I put too much salt in this last bread I made. Oh, God. And so I go out moose hunting. All I had was fish that I caught and bread. And this last batch was like, it had 4 times the salt it was supposed to have. I forgot. I put a teaspoon instead of a quarter teaspoon per cup or something like that, per cup of flour. And so I was eating this terrible salty bread.
It was like Gatorade bread.
Say again?
It was like Gatorade bread. You get all your electrolytes there.
Oh, yeah. I got too many electrolytes.
So,
but it was a little bit discouraging because I didn't know that much about moose then. And I had no idea how to call moose. I started experimenting and I had no luck at all.
I saw some of that on the show. There was one scene where you were kind of screaming at the moose, which was pretty interesting to see.
You probably mean the caribou on the lake.
Yeah.
When I was yelling at the caribou.
Yeah.
That's a whole different technique, echo chasing. But
that was a fun thing to show all my friends and stuff. I was like, this is my Uncle Glenn. And it was just you screaming at a bunch of animals in the woods. And it was cool, though.
I'll get into that. I'll explain that. But when you're hunting a moose, you don't yell at them in that way. But a very common technique, and the way I've gotten all the moose I've ever killed except the first one, is to call them in by imitating another moose. But at that time, I didn't know how to do that. I had no idea. And I was trying. I remember finding some caribou antlers that were shed on the ground, and I'd click them together and maybe a moose would come. Didn't. And, there are not a lot of moose there. Moose use the area, but because there's so much less vegetation there than there is further south, there's less for them to eat. They need a much bigger territory. So you have far fewer moose. I mean, you can walk around that lake. It's about 3-4 mile walk. And you might not see a single fresh moose track, even if it's a condition where you would notice them, like a light snow. You can walk around the whole lake and there might not be a single moose there that day. There might not be a moose in that valley sometimes. So I'm walking around looking for moose. It's not going too well. It took a long time, day after day. And when I did see moose, I didn't have any luck getting a shot at him. I didn't have any luck getting close at first. So it was getting discouraging. And legally, I can only hunt bulls. But it got to the point where, okay, I'm going to get any moose I can get. If I see a little calf moose today, I'm going to shoot it because I'm on my last bread here. And
how were you feeling when you were like just eating bread like that? I mean, that's not like for the amount you're moving around and hunting. And I mean, it's not much in terms of nutrition.
Yeah, I'd stop and pick berries too. At that time of year, there's a lot of cranberries growing and I'd eat cranberries.
But you had to have gotten pretty thin, right? If you're not eating any kind of fat or protein.
Yeah, I didn't lose a lot of weight that fall. There've been other times after that when things went wrong that I actually got very thin. There was one year that I was literally starving, but that fall I was doing okay. I mean, I caught a lot of fish and, I remember shooting some ducks also. I had a 22 with me and I remember shooting some ducks with a 22 one day. But eventually it had snowed a little bit. In September, it starts snowing and it's getting real cold. The lake freezes up sometimes at the end of September. So one day I was out and I think it was my 10th day looking for a moose, and I'd seen a few moose, but I just couldn't get anywhere near close enough to them and to take off. I was trying to sneak up on them rather than call them to me. Most of the time I just try to sneak through the bushes and you'd make noise and moose take off. Also, I had to get really close because I only had open sights, and experimenting with targets, I realized, like, gosh, Glenn, you better get really close to this moose. I actually had in my head that I'm not going to take a shot unless I'm 75 yards from the moose. I might not get a really good shot because my vision's not that great. And with the open sights, it didn't work too well. I had a plan. I had a scope with me. The problem was I'd made a mistake and I'd forgot. I carried, when I walked out there, I carried my rifle with me. So I had just the open sights on it. I had left in one of these barrels the scope. And I thought that the rings to attach it and everything was there. It wasn't. I couldn't attach the scope to my gun. So I ended up using the open sights. But anyway, after quite a few days of hunting a moose, I finally was out there one morning and walking around the lake, probably a half a mile or so from my camp. I came on some fresh moose tracks in this snow that had fallen, maybe about 1 inch of snow, and it was snowing lightly at the time. And I started just tracking this moose, which was something that I really hadn't done before either, tracking a moose. And usually, now that I have a lot more experience hunting moose, usually that doesn't work out too well. I have one other time tracked a moose and caught up with it, but a moose just walking, I mean, they're probably going 6 miles an hour or so, and they move a lot. So it's usually not the best strategy, but I was tracking this moose for quite a little ways, maybe a half a mile. I followed the tracks and I came into an area. I was in a spruce forest, small spruce trees. Trees up there aren't big, they're like this big around. But I came into this opening where it was tundra, and there's the moose. It's a young bull moose, and it's probably within 75 yards or so of me, standing right there looking back at me. It heard me following its tracks, and it had just stopped, and it was turned back looking at me, and I picked up that gun, and bang, I shot it.
You didn't call it at all?
No, it was close enough.
Okay.
I shot it, and it wasn't the best shot. I hit the spine, though, and it was the back legs collapsed. It was paralyzed. I had to shoot it again. I actually ended up shooting that moose 3 times. It was all, it was pretty exciting. I was all pumped up. My heart was racing. Wow, I'm shooting the moose. It went down, but it
no more cornbread.
It could still stand on its front legs, and I was bang, I shoot it again, and I walked up and it still wasn't completely dead, and I shot it a 3rd time. And the days were starting to get a little shorter, and it was snowing, and I realized once I got up to the moose and it was laying there on the ground that I was about 600 yards from the water. And the moose, it weighed definitely over 1,000 pounds. And it started to settle in that I had a pretty big job in front of me. I had my little knife, I had a backpack, I had my rifle, and I was all alone out there, 60-mile walk from the road.
How far were you from your camp?
Well, the whole key was to get it to the water, because I had a canoe that I had also left up there with the airplane the year before.
And it was going to be able to
water. I could paddle the canoe over. It was probably straight across the water. It was maybe half a mile.
Mm-hmm.
But the 600 yards down to the lake was the problem. And in subsequent years, I typically did not shoot moose that far from the lake. But that first one, I had quite a job. I also didn't have a sled. I turned, after moving that moose, I realized sled is a very helpful tool. And
did you just carry it?
Moose without a sled.
Did you just drag it, or what did you do?
Oh, there was no chance of dragging. No, there's no chance of dragging a whole moose. I had actually read a lot about butchering moose and moving moose around, so I wasn't totally clueless, but it was all theory, and I had to put it into practice. So just cutting it up was the first challenge, and a variety of things happened. I actually got charged by another moose just before I started butchering it. I wrote that story. It's on Facebook in the notes section if you want to read that one, but I don't want to diverge too much. The main challenge, though, was getting it down to the lake. So I cut it up into 10 pieces. It's 10 or 11 pieces is usually, you have 10 or 11 loads to move a moose by yourself without any equipment. It always ends up taking me at least 10 loads, I think, to move a moose.